Good evening and welcome. I'm Ethel Berger, faculty co-director of the science program at the Harvard Radcliffe Institute and professor of astronomy in the Harvard Faculty of Arts and Sciences. I'm thrilled to welcome you this evening to the keynote opening event of our annual science symposium, Feeding the Future, Food Sustainability and Climate Change. The keynote conversation this evening and the symposium tomorrow are hybrid events, and I'm really thrilled to see so many people here in the audience, and to welcome those joining us virtually from all over the world. For those in the audience, I hope you enjoy the incredible food catered by Mei Mei Dumplings as much as I did. So food, seemingly such a simple concept, any nutritious substance used by the body to sustain life. And it's something that many of us take for granted. But food is incredibly complex. It carries a strong cultural and personal significance. Its production is an industrial complex on the one hand, and the livelihood of small family-owned farms on the other. It is transported halfway around the world to satisfy the desires of some, but is not stably accessible for at least 10% of the world's population, more than 800 million people, who suffer from hunger or food insecurity. And it is a significant stressor even in places like Massachusetts, where 21% of households with children are food insecure. And these numbers are much more dire in the global south and for marginalized communities in the US. And if that wasn't enough, food has a complex interplay with climate change. Its production and transportation are contributors to greenhouse gas emission, and at the same time, it is severely impacted by changes in the global climate and local weather patterns. Droughts decimating wheat production in North Africa, a late spring freeze destroying 95% of Georgia peach production. As noted clearly and succinctly in the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, IPCC 6th Assessment Report, climate change has reduced food security and affected water security, hindering efforts to meet sustainable development goals. The report goes on to talk about how these adverse effects lead to reduced health outcomes and increased mortality. Tomorrow's symposium will address critical aspects of the interplay between climate change and food, bringing in the perspectives of scientists and restaurateurs, policymakers and water experts, on-the-ground practitioners and journalists. We will hear about the problems, but also about creative work throughout the food production, preparation, and consumption system to mitigate and fight against the effects of climate change. This evening's keynote conversation and tomorrow's symposium are an important part of the Harvard Radcliffe Institute Climate Change Initiative, an effort to explore the impacts of the climate crisis through an interdisciplinary lens and to address issues of climate justice, particularly the disproportionate effects on marginalized communities locally and globally. Over the course of this initiative, conducted in tandem with efforts in every school across the university and in coordination with the Salada Institute for Climate and Sustainability at Harvard, Radcliffe is gathering scholars, practitioners, and students to engage with issues that can be best understood and addressed by drawing on research from across multiple disciplines. For full descriptions of our commitment, including our many past and future public programs and exhibitions, please visit About the Institute page on the Radcliffe website, radcliffe.harvard.edu, and click on Our Work. And now I would like to introduce this evening's keynote speaker. Irene Shiang Li is a co-founder and co-owner of Mei Mei Dumplings here in Boston. Irene is the winner of a 2022 James Beard Leadership Award, which recognizes the visionaries responsible for creating a healthier, safer, and more equitable and sustainable food system. Irene is involved with several community organizations and serves on the boards of Haley House, Loving Spoonfuls, and Project Bread. Following the COVID-19 pandemic, Irene spearheaded a wide range of efforts aimed at helping restaurants, hospital workers, and immigrant families secure funding and groceries. She is similarly involved in leading efforts to transform the restaurant industry into one that takes close care of the needs and potential of its workers, most recently as co-founder of PrepShift, a workforce training consultancy that supports small restaurants and their teams to thrive sustainably and equitably. Along with her sister Margaret, Irene is a co-author of the terrific new cookbook, Perfectly Good Food, a totally achievable zero-waste approach to home cooking, which I highly recommend. This evening, Irene will discuss her efforts to offer healthy, sustainable food through equitable partnerships and business models. Joining Irene in conversation is Barbara Moran, a correspondent on WBUR's climate and environmental team. Barbara is an award-winning science journalist who has covered public health, environmental justice, and the intersection of science and society for over 25 years, working at publications such as the New York Times, New Scientist, and the Boston Globe magazine. And she has produced television documentaries for PBS and others. Barbara was a Knight Fellow at MIT and was twice awarded the National Association of Science Writers' highest honor, the Science in Society Award. At WBUR, she focuses on climate science and climate solutions and is one of the leading contributors to the WBUR newsletter, Cooked, the Search for Sustainable Eats. We will have information about how to sign up for this informative and entertaining newsletter in a few minutes. Before I turn the floor over to Irene and Barbara, I would like to take a moment to acknowledge the members of the Radcliffe Institute Leadership Society and our annual donors who are watching. Your generosity keeps Radcliffe programming free and open to the public, and we thank you. We also wish to gratefully recognize the Melanie, Mason, and David W. Niemiec Fund for Science and the Ethel and David Jackson Fund for the Future Climate, which are supporting this event. In addition, tonight's program and public reception that preceded it are co-sponsored by the Salada Institute for Climate and Sustainability at Harvard University, and we thank them for their support and ongoing partnership. Audience members, whether you are here in person or online, are welcome and encouraged to submit questions at any time during the program using the Slido link provided on the screen behind me and posted in the chat of the Zoom webinar. So now, without further ado, it is my great pleasure to invite Irene Li and Barbara Moran to the stage.
Okay, we made it up here without falling over. That was the first best thing. Thank you all for coming. I'm so excited to be here. So I was preparing for this earlier and thinking about how you have put yourself at the intersection of all of these huge important issues in society, right? Climate change, workers' rights, corporate responsibility, and what am I gonna have for dinner? Which is a question everybody in the room asks them.
Existential question.
Exactly. So to talk about, I wanted to start by talking about how did you get here? Right? How did you land here at sort of this nexus of all of these important things? And so can you just talk a little bit about how you started? Tell me about the first food truck.
Absolutely. I think that it all goes back to growing up in a Chinese American family here in Boston. We ate Chinese food pretty much every night, but we also loved eating pretty much everything you can find to eat in Boston. And so we are a food-obsessed family. When we get together, and I know this is true for so many families, when we get together, we're talking about lunch as we eat breakfast, we're arguing about dinner as we eat lunch, you know the drill. And so the center of the family life was always, you have to be at the table at 6 p.m. for dinner. Doesn't matter what else you were doing. And so I feel like that cemented food kind of at the center of how I thought about not just my own life, but the life and relationships in my family. And I wasn't that interested in cooking, very interested in eating, but I wasn't that interested in cooking until I was in Ithaca, New York doing my undergrad at Cornell. Cornell and Ithaca have an incredible food culture. The College of Agriculture means that there are a lot of like weird young farmers doing weird stuff. And so you can-
Wait, like, example?
Like cold hardy kiwis and pawpaw fruit, which perhaps you're familiar with.
Pawpaws, yes, so they grew kiwis in Ithaca.
They do.
Amazing.
Can you believe it? Yeah, so I did not attend the agriculture school or the hotel school, but I benefited tremendously from the local farmers market and really got into cooking as a way to kind of decompress from my academic life, which was much more focused on cultural studies and inequality. And this was the Michelle Obama era. And so food justice, food security, these were new phrases to me.
Yeah.
And feeling that there was an opportunity there, that's what led me to join my brother to open our food truck in 2012 here in Boston.
So none of you, from what I understand, none of you had any experience with like professional food cooking, is that right? But you just said, hey, let's do a food truck.
Is YouTube professional experience? I guess what I should say is that my brother had worked in restaurants for about a decade prior to opening Mei Mei, but he was a front of the house guy. He actually started out as a bouncer. And so if you sang karaoke in Chinatown in the late noughties, he probably carded you or whatever. But he likes to say he broke the ice with our two parents, who are doctors, and he was the first disappointment. He likes to joke, and so he paved the way for us to be equally disappointing. But as we like to say, we discovered that as soon as our mom figured out that like she could be like a hard-ass Chinese mom about any career we chose. It's more the practice, less the result. And so she has kind of brought that sense of humor and loving criticism to the careers that we have ended up in. So all's well that ends well.
That's amazing. Yeah. Okay, so you started with the food truck, the dumpling food truck. Is that right? Okay. Did you have other stuff, or was it dumpling focused?
You know, Barbara, we were so excited about doing dumplings, and then we sold out of our backstock of dumplings in the first 2 days of running the food truck. And then we were like, I guess we have to invent some other food. So that's how we started making scallion pancake sandwiches and a lot of the other items that you can still find on our menu. But there were days where we were vending in Copley Square, and then we would have no food left, and we would just go over to the Copley Farmers Market and say, what do you have left for us? And then figure it out.
Oh, that is so interesting. Okay, so that's going to figure into the conversation later. So interesting. Okay, so, and I understand, like, from the beginning, you were really thinking about how to do this business sustainably and source food from local farmers, and why? I mean, weren't you just thinking, like, we're trying to make this little truck work? You know, I mean, why into that? It seems like it would make it harder.
There was definitely an experimental mentality to it, and I think what was important to me was leaving Ithaca, New York, coming home to Boston. We moved home because our dad was getting older. He had Alzheimer's disease. And I felt like, wow, like Boston's restaurant scene is so big and has so much to offer compared to tiny Ithaca, New York. But the farm-to-table movement is way behind here. Because if you want to eat a steak from a cow that lived a beautiful life and had one bad day, you have to pay. You have to go to a fancy French restaurant for it. And that is not the case in Ithaca, New York. You know, Ithaca got cupcakes like a decade after the rest of us, but farm-to-table is so ingrained in the fabric of even the kind of humblest mom and pop restaurants. And so the gap that I saw in the market was, can we do farm to table or farm to truck or farm to curb or whatever you want to call it? Can we do that at kind of a lunchtime price point and not ask people to sit at a white tablecloth in order to eat ingredients that were raised and prepared with care and intention?
Yeah, I would guess no. But did you? How did that go?
We learned a lot. There is a picture which I didn't prepare for us today, but you can imagine it. I really love pork, and I knew that if we wanted to use meat from pigs that lived a beautiful life and had one bad day, we would have to buy the whole pig from the farmer. And so I taught myself how to break down whole sides of pork. I waited till my mom was on vacation, and I used her kitchen to do this. But there were a lot of things that I was very committed to, and a lot of things that I said, wow, that is so not practical. And so there were certainly compromises along the way, but through the years, for the last 11 years, we have continued our focus on meat from animals that get to live on pasture, so they get to live some of their life outside. And we continue to source about 70% of our produce locally and regionally, so basically meaning New England and New York. And there were a lot of things that I would have done differently, but Boston was so good to us in letting us experiment, in letting us fail and iterate every single day, especially on a food truck. I think people are forgiving about that kind of thing. And so we learned a lot about what felt possible and also what we might make possible in the process of growing the local and regional food economy here. And so seeing that Sweet Green and Dig In and medium-sized companies can source locally, I like to think that that is because of infrastructure that we've all built together over time. And so we are now in a moment where you can eat a locally raised egg, in almost any zip code in the greater Boston area. That wasn't true 11 years ago. So I think we've made progress, as Mei Mei has made progress too.
That is so interesting. What drove you to make that extra effort? Was it sort of just wanting to create better tasting local food, or were you thinking about the climate?
I think spite, wanting
spite.
to show.
Spite is the best emotion.
Of course we can do it. And if you think we can't, then you just wait, we'll show you.
Got it.
Of course, I had connected really deeply to people who grow food, people who raise animals, and seen firsthand how much work it takes. And I don't know, for those of you who garden, knowing that so much of that food ends up in the trash, knowing that it takes human hands and labor and machinery and water and fertilizer and really good weather and all of those things, I think it connects you to food in a different way. It makes you appreciate the magic of food. And then you think about how unmagical food usually seems. Like, this peanut butter and jelly sandwich doesn't feel that magical. But I think what I saw was okay, we could have magic for 3 times a day in our food. And that's what I want to bring to people. And then I think people who didn't believe in what we were doing or who weren't sure what was possible, I did really want to show them. I'm an Aries, so I don't know.
Whatever
Maybe
it
that's
takes.
part of it.
Totally.
Yeah, and that was a great motivator for me.
I want to follow up on the food waste question. I just want to remind the audience that people can ask questions all through the conversation using this code thing up here, and also on Slido using that code, and we'll have time for questions at the end. So you and I first met talking about food waste,
yes.
Right? When I was researching this newsletter about climate and food for WBUR. Actually, you want a shameless plug picture?
Yeah, we have a slide prepared.
Where's the
for you
shameless
all?
plug? There we go. Ta-da! All right.
And by the way, this is a top-of-the-line newsletter. It's really funny. It has a ton of personality, and I just am so proud to be part of it. So thank you, Barbara, for all your work on it.
She stars in episode 4, Eat Your Garbage, which is what we're going to talk about. So when I was writing this, I started thinking about food waste, right? And I hadn't realized that it's such a huge climate issue. I'm going to give a few stats. About 35% of food produced in the US is never eaten. About a quarter of a third of wasted food comes from people's homes. That makes households the largest producers of food waste. And then there's some other terrible stat, right? The amount of energy it takes to make and dispose America's wasted food equivalent to the annual CO2 emissions of 42 coal-fired plants. Boo! Okay.
And there are still people who don't have enough
food.
Eat.
Right. So what I like about food waste, it's the thing that actually everybody in America could agree on,
yes.
right? Food waste, bad. So you were thinking about this a lot with your restaurant.
Yes.
And so tell me why.
Well, in a restaurant, it's your job to not waste food. Your bottom line depends on you making the most of your materials. And so going from home cooking and being amateur home cooks to managing a restaurant kitchen, that was a big change for us. So we had to learn to think about ingredients in a different way. Not just that it feels bad to throw away food that you could have served, but also that's your money in the trash.
Yeah.
And if you are not profitable at the end of the year, you think back to all those times you dumped those ingredients in the garbage or the compost, as the case may be.
Yeah.
And my sister has always had this superpower where she can go to anyone's house and they'll say to her, oh, there's nothing to eat here. And she'll go through the fridge and she'll go through the pantry, and then 40 minutes later, she'll have a 3-course meal on the table, and everyone is like, where did that come from? And so I think that combined with the impetus to use our ingredients wisely really inspired Food Waste Feast, which was her blog that she wrote for many years prior to working on the book. And let me tell you all, like, we are not formally trained, and we also are pretty lazy cooks. Like, we love shortcuts. We don't want to strain anything once, much less 4 times, as you do in some traditional cuisines. So Food Waste Feast was all about making cooking with everything, using it all up, as accessible and kind of drama and fuss-free as possible. And I think that really comes through in the book now.
So we also have a slide about the book too. So tell me, oh, there you guys are making some food with garbage.
That's right. Our publishers were like, we don't want the word waste, and in the title of the book, and please don't make jokes about eating trash.
Sorry. How can you not?
Yes, as a human raccoon was like, fine.
Yeah. So you
perfectly good food.
I think there's the double awesome.
Yes.
Right. So for people who don't know, tell people about what is the double awesome and how does this fit into the story?
The double awesome is the star of our food truck menu and now restaurant menu in South Boston. It's a scallion pancake sandwich with 2 oozy eggs, melted cheddar cheese, and local greens pesto. And for us, local greens pesto was sort of the first food waste, eat your trash ingredient that was really a star on the menu. So to make local greens pesto, well, let's take a step back. Think of pesto in the traditional sense. You've got your basil leaves, you've got your pine nuts, your Parmesan cheese, your good olive oil. That gets really expensive.
I was just adding it up in my head. It's like, that's $100 pesto right there.
Yes, yeah, okay. It really hurts. And so what we were thinking about was, okay, how do we make a sauce that really serves the same purpose, that also uses up product that we might not otherwise use, and that is gonna be really delicious and part of this very fun dish, which I think we've sold tens of thousands of, and we're putting Don Buffoni, the chicken farmer's kids, through college. Maybe one kid, I don't know. But so the local greens pesto from week to week would change depending on what we had in season, depending on what scraps we had. We used a lot of stems. We used a lot of arugula that had holes in it, and so the farmer couldn't get the price they wanted at the market. We used a lot of scallion tops. You know how when you buy scallions at the store, they're this tall? They don't grow like that. They have a whole top, right? And so we would go to the farms we were working with and say, you have anything green we can put in a sauce? And that is where the local greens pesto came from. And pesto, the word comes from the Latin, or I think the Italian and the Latin, pestare, which means you're just mushing it. And so pesto is just a ground up sauce. And so when we kind of think more broadly about what a pesto or a sauce can be, all these different things become possible.
Did it ever go terribly wrong?
Yeah, and that's why you have to add more, more salt, more vinegar, more olive oil. You got to balance it all out. But that's also why tasting as you cook is so important. Because you might follow a recipe to a T, but if your beets are a little bit more bitter than the ones the chef was using when they wrote that recipe, if your vinegar is older and it doesn't have the same kick, like all of these things mean that we should really all be freestyling and responding to the recipe as we cook it. And so, yes, there were many corrections that had to be made with our pesto, but we kind of got it down to a reliable 50% kale stems, 25% bitter greens, 25% herbs. So there's a formula of sorts. And I think that's also what's good about the book is like, it's not magic. There's a logic to a lot of what we do that maybe seems like magic if you're not a very experienced cook. But we really tried to bring the logic to our reader and say, here's how we think about this. Here's how we make a decision when we're in the kitchen.
I was just thinking about all the stems I throw away and feeling so terrible.
Listen, when we were on book tour, we were with our cousin in her house, and she was saying, oh, I'm so embarrassed to compost anything in front of you. And we said, oh, that's totally fine. You should see our compost bins. But the whole point of the book is really to provide a toolkit. And we don't do everything in the book. Far from it. We explain techniques that we will never do because we're too lazy. But the book is full of ideas, and so we want you to use the ideas when they feel appropriate to you. When you are confronted by the stems, and
Yeah.
you really decide, okay, I want to do something with these. I don't want to just throw them in the compost. But are we expecting everyone to do all our techniques all the time? Absolutely not. That would be outlandish. And we don't even do that. So again, tools.
Just thinking, you're not lazy. I mean, how many of you have written like 3 cookbooks and you're, yes, run a restaurant, so yes. Okay, all right, so we're gonna like bring this home and give you a little test
Yes.
with my refrigerator. So what we've done is took a picture of my fridge, my weekday fridge. In all my shame, I got approval from my husband to do this.
Barbara is so brave to be doing this. I mean, I think it's great, but.
Yeah, so I'll have you, these might be a little small to read. I'll give you some highlights in here. So this is Wednesday, Thursday night, which is, it actually looks better than usual. Eggs, we always have eggs. We have seemingly hundreds of half-empty bottles of hot sauce and weird condiments. I found half a pancake, like wrapped up. And I'm just like, why? But I'm like, well, this must be here for a reason, so I left it. This really old tzatziki that was so old, I didn't even want to open it to throw away. So I just shoved it in the back.
Love
it's
that.
still there.
Yep.
It's disgusting. I'm a terrible person. The hummus was still good. Weird. I always have these limp scallions.
Yep.
And broccoli that's getting yellow.
Yep.
It's terrible. There was a nice, but there's a fruit looked okay. All right. So that's, okay, so this is typical fridge for me. And then there's a couple close-ups. So this is where you're on the hot spot.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. All right. So there's some close-ups.
But I
The
think,
duck sauce. Yeah, okay.
I think
Go
I
ahead.
should say that.
You want to stop and
I
go
think-
back to the big picture?
I think we're laughing because, like, this is deeply relatable, right? We all know what it feels like to have a fridge full of things that we're not quite sure how they got there or how they're going to leave. And I have to say, like, for me, even as a professional cook, this is very, very, very relatable. And 2 members of my household are here, and they can confirm, like, those limes, they need to go. But I think that's what's so fun about this, in my mind. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm glad everybody's having fun. All right, good. Okay, so we'll talk about food storage after because you have a nice diagram after. But then, all right, let's go to the close-ups. See if you have any tips. So, okay, I always end up with so much leftover pasta, and I have no idea what to do with it, and that ends up in the trash, or in the compost a lot. And then so we always end up with so much duck sauce. And
I want to know what kind of party you had that you have so much duck sauce. That
know,
sounds
it
like
just
my
happened.
kind of thing.
Okay, so looking at this array of not waste but ingredients.
Yes.
Right. What jumps out to you? Like, what could you do with this other than despair?
We have in the book a lot of what we call hero recipes because they're super flexible and they help you rescue food. So, you know, a frittata is a kind of classic hero recipe. I did not grow up eating frittata, but I have discovered that if you keep eggs in your fridge, which keep forever, you can just put anything in there, and with enough cheese, you're good to go. So I love a frittata with pasta in it. And
What?
Yeah, it's kind of crazy.
No, it'd be mushy. Is it really? It's okay?
I think it's really good. The other thing that I like is a kind of a pasta bake. So, you know, again, with enough cheese, you can solve any problem. And you wrote that you have lots of cheddar cheese, so I think there are problems to be solved here.
Yeah, enough cheddar cheese to feed an army.
Yes.
Which is true, yes.
Exactly.
Okay.
And so just think of all the recipes where the first step is like, cook all this pasta. Oh my God, you already did that, Barbara.
Oh,
Yeah,
I'm ahead of the game.
So,
I'm
you
not
know, your macaroni and cheese, of course, your pasta bake, your frittata. You can even fry up the pasta and get it like crispy, and then it's just a treat you can eat out of hand. But
That's amazing.
I think that for a lot of grains, you know, this goes for rice. It goes for, I don't know, did anyone go on like a farro kick at some point? They're like whole grains. So, you know, you can make a fried or sautéed dish. You can make a baked dish. And you can incorporate a lot of the fun stuff that you have in your fridge drawers to create different sauces. So that's kind of the strategy I would take with pasta.
Okay,
Yeah.
I like that. Okay. What about staples. Give me like the top 5 things that you should have in your cabinet so you can not waste food.
Definitely,
You know what I mean?
yeah. So I guess this would be fridge and cabinet
Yeah.
maybe, but I think canned goods like beans that you can always add to turn too much pasta that you cooked into something that also has protein in it. That can be super helpful. Eggs are magic, and I always think having a couple dozen eggs in the fridge is smart. Puff pastry we talk about in the book as kind of a secret weapon because you can take your leftovers and put them in a little puff pastry, and then they're French.
Ooh la la!
Yes, exactly. So a kind of galette or just a little, there's like a TikTok puff pastry hack where you like did it upside down, and I don't know. But puff pastry can make a lot of things feel exciting to eat. And then I guess I would say, for me, growing up in a Chinese American household, there's always rice on the counter. And you can do a lot of things with rice. You can make fritters, you can make fried rice, you can make rice porridge or congee, and all of those are great opportunities for the odds and ends. Even the wilted scallions love to be in fried rice.
Interesting. Yeah. Oh, rice porridge. I like that idea. Come on, place. All right. We have a picture that I think from the book, I believe. Ta-da! Okay, so this is, the biggest food waste problem comes, what I understand, from herbs and greens, right? And so you can get around a lot of that by...
With proper storage.
Yes, all right, so talk a little bit about that.
So in the book, we do talk about storage for different ingredients, especially ones that are sensitive and that you paid top dollar for. So when I buy a box of beautiful salad greens, as soon as I get home, I'm usually sticking a paper towel or a kitchen towel in there to help regulate the moisture. A lot of herbs, especially the ones that are kind of fresh and tender, we store them almost like you would flowers, in a cup with some water and perhaps with a plastic bag over the top. But it usually is...
That doesn't kill them?
No, I guess if you're keeping them in the fridge, you want the plastic bag over the top. But if you're getting like fresh basil, even that can be fine on the countertop for a couple days, just in a little bit of water, because it's still a plant and it is actually still alive. So it's like keeping flowers. And we also recommend the Eat Me First box in the fridge.
I like this, eat me first.
Yes, so this came out of the way that we thought about food in the restaurant walk-in. If it's out of sight, it's out of mind. And if you're dealing with a whole refrigerated room, there are a lot of places that are out of sight. And so in restaurants, we call it first in, first out to make sure that you're rotating the product. But at home, we call it the Eat Me First box. So if you have half a lemon, and you don't want to end up with 4 half lemons in all the different corners of your fridge, we've all been there. I probably have some in there right now. That is a perfect candidate for the Eat Me First box. Or if you have some leftover cream that you know you are not going to find a use for unless you force yourself to, that goes in the Eat Me First box. We keep it at eye level. The way fridges are designed is so brutal. Why are they so deep? They should be wide so we can see the stuff in them. But that's another project, I guess.
That's your next panel.
But yeah, I think if out of sight, out of mind, then in sight, hopefully you use it up.
Great. Okay. So let me just back this out for a minute and think about sort of a bigger picture question, because one of the reasons I wrote the newsletter and one of the reasons why you wrote this cookbook is because people feel very anxious about climate change, and they want to do something about it. And my newsletter tried to address this, and this book tries to address this. But part of me feels like it's not actually just regular people's fault. You know what I mean? Like, do we put all the responsibility on people?
Sure.
Like, how do you work this through your brain?
Well, Barbara, I am always eager to blame corporations for climate change.
Except, are you a corporation now?
I'm a little one, yeah. I'm sure we're doing our part. So what I will say, though, is that so much of food waste does happen in households. And so it really is on us this time. And also, if you think about food getting wasted at the household level, like that is the very last possible step in the food chain. Like a bag of spinach becomes more resource intensive as it makes its way to your home.
Walk me through that a little
So
bit.
if the grocery store throws it away, that sucks. But if you also drove to the grocery store and then you stored it in your fridge and then you worried about it and used your own energy on it, like there's more storage, there's more transportation, there's more resources being used as the food goes to your home. So in the way, I kind of think of it as like the greatest waste is when we let the food make it all the way to our houses and then it ends up in the trash or the compost.
Yep.
And obviously, you know, a single person's practice is not going to stem or turn the tide, but I do think it's a version of mindfulness that does have an impact.
Yeah.
And the other thing about the book is we didn't write it to be about climate change. We just wrote it to make cooking feel more accessible and fun. And if we can fight climate change in the meantime, like that's great.
Yeah.
And we expect a lot of people, honestly, to open up the book and have no interest in climate change. They want to save money. They want to get food on the table faster. It just feels bad to throw stuff out. Like all of those are great reasons to pick up the book or to be thinking about food waste. And so we're hoping that, you know, we might have folks who become more interested in the climate impact of food waste by reading the book. But we're hoping that there are a lot of entry points into the topic.
Did you have another slide from the book that you wanted
I did
to
have
show
one
too?
more slide from the book, yeah. So we have, the book is illustrated.
These are so nice.
Yeah.
They're so like friendly and not intimidating.
So we worked with an illustrator named Iris Gottlieb, who is also an author and who creates these beautiful visuals that have a sense of humor to them, which I think is really important. And also, you know, we love perfectly photographed cookbooks. We own many of them. But how are you supposed to feel when your recipe doesn't come out looking like it did in the book? Especially if you freestyled a little bit and you use different ingredients, then it's definitely not gonna look like what it came out looking like in the book. And so we wanted this to feel more like a field guide and more like a kind of how-to or like a you know, a set of steps if you're triaging your fridge, and less like a kind of artsy book where it doesn't feel attainable.
Yeah.
And all the sort of celebrity chef and restaurant culture, I think maybe is contributing to people who cook at home feeling like, oh, I can't do that. Of course you can, of course you can. And so that's what we really want the book to communicate. And what we also say is like, if you mess up the recipe, eat the evidence and you just move on. Like it's just, it's just dinner. And so these are two examples of these sort of flow charts, decision tools that we have, where we want to encourage cooks to be intuitive, to taste, to use their best judgment about when to add a certain ingredient, or does this need more honey, or what do I do if it's too salty? And so these are two of my favorite images in the book. And the Kitchen Scrap Chili Crisp, which you should not try to say too fast, is also, I think, a favorite because it uses so much nice scrap.
Yeah.
And so, as we all know, the butts of those onions, the peels of your garlic, those scallion ends that are looking pretty sad in the fridge, those all still have a ton of flavor in them, and you can get that flavor without dealing with the texture or the, you know, kind of fibrousness of the product
Interesting.
itself. Yeah.
Yeah, that's amazing. I'm like onion peels, who knew? Yeah.
Delicious.
I love this
crisp
because it's sort of like having you there telling me what to do.
Yeah, and I think, again, like
So friendly.
we care so much that people have good experiences with food, not just when they're at Mei Mei at our business. Like we want them to experience food in a more magical way wherever they are. And so that's, I think, part of why education is so core to what we do. And like we host the dumpling classes at the factory. Like we want everyone to come in and be part of it with us. And if that means you're cooking more at home and you come to Mei Mei less, like I think that's fine with us, honestly. Like it's okay. And I think that's, again, how we build really resilient culture around food.
Yeah, yeah. All right, let's bring it out a little bit to talk a little more about sort of big picture food and climate issues. And do we have one more slide to show the cover of this book, which you all should,
I think it's back
buy.
a couple. Yeah, there we go.
There we go. You can go buy that for all your gift-giving needs. It's wonderful.
One of the great things is we always hear from people like, I know someone who needs this book. And we're like, great, a gift is a really not passive-aggressive way to say that. But we all have that person in our lives, right, who are like, gosh, they just throw it all away.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you think about, food and sustainability on many levels, as, in your philanthropy work and as a, restaurant owner and just as a home cook. So I'm going to just talk about a few of sort of the big questions in food and how are you thinking about them? So let's start with the big one, which is beef. How are you thinking about that?
Yum. Well,
that's it. Yum. Yeah.
Beef is a tough one, right?
Yeah.
Because it is so resource intensive to produce beef, and the outputs of beef cattle are also pretty ruinous for the climate. I am pretty selective about when I eat beef and what kind of beef I eat. I believe there is research that shows that beef can be raised in a bunch of different ways, and those all have different climate impacts. I would rely on someone more expert than I to tell me if that's true or not. But we order in our household from Lilac Hedge Farm, which is based in Central Mass, and I would really like to think that when we raise animals outside and let them do the things they're supposed to do and eat the things they're supposed to eat, the impact on climate is significantly lower. But you have to tell me if I'm right or not.
I'm not telling you anything. No, we'll leave that for the Q&A. All right, fish. See, it's the problem.
I know, yeah. And
Climate
that's why we have to write newsletters and cookbooks that have levity and
Yes.
Yeah, because it's just so depressing. So again, I would say fish I am pretty selective about. And I guess maybe one of the themes that will emerge here is that I don't think it's useful to say categorically, don't eat this or do eat that.
Right.
That's one of the lessons for us. There's always a more interesting and complicated story. And so, for example, saying like, don't eat bluefin tuna ever for any reason.
Yeah.
Like, that's not gonna cut it for so many different reasons.
Yeah.
And so, again, I would say I try to be conscientious about what fish I eat. I've got the Monterey Bay Seafood app on my phone. And I try to go to people who know more than I do about seafood when I have questions or when I have concerns.
For people who don't know, tell them what the app is.
Yeah, so the app is from the Monterey Bay Aquarium in Monterey Bay, California, and it has kind of a catalog of all the different types of seafood and all the places it can come from and all the ways you can harvest it. And so it is taking into account the context for all of these products, which often kind of in headlines just gets boiled down to like, don't eat tuna or what have you.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Super. So so it's this more holistic approach rather than a, do this, don't do that.
Exactly.
All right. How do you deal in the restaurant industry with packaging, which I know has come up a lot? And it's not exactly food, but it's food adjacent.
Of course, yeah.
It's food encircling.
Yes. One of the things I'll say about packaging is I think that compostable plastic is just garbage. It is more expensive than, when did we invent the paper cup? I don't know, like decades ago at least. Like, the paper cup is still the best option on so many levels. And we have all these different products, and they are expensive, which, eats into restaurants' bottom lines, which if your restaurant has a bottom line at all right now, like, that's great.
Yeah.
But it doesn't really, you can't really compost corn plastic. Like, it just breaks up into smaller pieces. I don't know, someone may wish to educate me further on this, but we did a lot of work with Product Stewardship Institute, which is headquartered here in Boston, on plastic reduction. And like, the #1 recommendation was like, just use paper. We figured out paper a long time ago.
Interesting.
And so there are not always paper options, but compostable plastic, recycled plastic, there are a lot of issues there. The other thing I learned recently that I do want everyone to know is that the black plastic takeout containers, the bottoms of those containers, not recyclable. Ooh, that feels bad, huh? So again, The paper containers, the aluminum containers, those are all better options. And Product Stewardship Institute does a lot of education with consumers as well as operators on different ways to both save money and make choices that were less resource intensive to produce and also less resource intensive to get rid of.
Interesting.
Yeah.
How do you deal with energy use in your restaurant? Is that an issue? Because that could get your costs down too, potentially, if you found a way.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, the good news about sustainability in restaurants is that it usually is good for the triple bottom line.
Yeah.
So saving money on electricity is good on a bunch of different levels. In our restaurant right now, we are an all-electric facility. So the kitchen is all electric, and do we miss having big burners? Yes, sometimes. But we are in the city of Boston in Southie, and so we benefit from community choice electricity, which basically cut our bill in half when we opted into it. And so if you are a homeowner or business owner in the city, I think Cambridge also has a version of community choice electricity. So those are great programs to look into. And there are, again, tons of resources from EPA, from the resources in Massachusetts about how to make things more efficient. A fancy air curtain that will help you with heating and cooling, or a little aerator on your faucet. So there's a whole kind of range of opportunities out there. And in my consulting work for restaurants, we talk about a lot of these things. But restaurants are struggling so much right now that it is hard to implement these kind of longer term solutions and strategies. But if you can just show up with an aerator or a spray hose and say, let's cut your water bill in half, that's pretty compelling.
Yeah. And the last one I was going to ask is just looping back to local food. Are there any sort of real sticking points of local things you just can't get local, or you really want to get local, but it's, I guess,
definitely
just can't figure it out?
Coffee, chocolate, citrus, I think the 3 C's, those really hurt if you're on a 100% locavore diet, and obviously most of us are not. The good news is that we can still buy those ingredients with intention.
Yeah.
And so whether it's fair trade or organic, kind of pick your battle, and we really try to be choosy about those items. But with advances in agriculture, in greenhouse growing, there are things that are now available locally all year round. It's pretty incredible. And so that has really changed the game for restaurants like Mei Mei that, we want to serve salad in December.
Yeah.
We want to eat salad in December. And so now there are ways, much easier ways for us to provide that experience.
Yeah, I was just trying to think if there's any way to grow coffee here, but no.
I don't think so. We'll take that to Cornell.
Okay. So one other thing that you're really involved with is worker rights and the things you do in your restaurants. And with climate change overall, there's often this fear that people are kind of sidelined, when it comes to saving the planet. Yeah. And I wanted to talk to you a little bit about how you sort of thinking about the sustainability of the worker in the restaurant industry, in addition to all these other sustainability things. So tell me about that part of your work.
Certainly. Well, that goes back, I think, to the triple bottom line, which is that a business should be profitable, and it should also be good for people and for planet. And I think, increasingly, workers also want that. People don't want to work at a business that has terrible sustainability practices. And I think one of the things that my team over the years at Mei Mei has taught me is that people who are proud of where they work do a really good job.
Interesting.
And they also help attract more people to come work there. Because you can just tell, when you go into, I don't know, any store or restaurant, you can tell when someone does not like being there. And like, that sucks. Like as a consumer, that feels bad too.
Yeah.
And so for me, I think all these versions of sustainability are intertwined. And so our motto at Prep Shift, which is my restaurant consulting business, is we make restaurants work for everyone. So it has to work for the operator or else they're not gonna keep the restaurant open. It has to work for the workers or else people are not gonna get their food. It has to work for guests, obviously, the value proposition has to be there. And then it has to work for all the other stakeholders involved. That's investors, it's community members, it's neighbors. And I think that if we do work together, that is possible. But right now, I think a lot of people are drawing the short straw when it comes to restaurants. And so that's what I'm most interested in. How do we harness the energy and the knowledge and know-how that frontline workers have? And how do we actually use that to improve businesses?
So tell me a little bit about this kind of crazy, to me, sounding thing that you did, where opening your books
Yes.
to your staff. So for people who haven't heard about this, tell me how this all came about and what it
Yeah.
is.
Has anyone ever heard of open book management? Okay, cool.
Oh, look
my
at that.
God,
Yeah,
look at it. Amazing. So we practice a version of what's called open book management at Mei Mei, and at Prep Shift, we're kind of rebranding open book management. So we call it team-wide financial engagement now, because people like really think a lot of crazy things when you say open book. They make a lot of assumptions about it. And also it's like from the 90s and it's for like men in suits. But anyway, all of that is to say, we believe that there are 3 ways to run a business that really does, that leverages its workers and engages them in the business's success. So the first thing we have to do is education. We have to tell them how the game is played. And so at Mei Mei, our team learns about what benchmarks are for different expense categories. They learn, in broad terms, how to read a profit and loss statement. What is a profit and loss statement? The second thing we do is engage them in actually moving those numbers. And so we create initiatives and different goals that we look at as a team. And then the third thing is they get a incentive and they get to share in the success of the business. And all of this is kind of standard issue business management stuff, which is like, if you set a goal, you're more likely to perform. If you check on your goal and have accountability, you are gonna have a culture where people are thinking about those goals. And so all of that is to say, for example, one of our team members who was a dishwasher for many years, Walter knows a lot about our business that I don't know. And that I would never know because I am not the person in the dish pit washing the dishes. Walter can tell me if we are over-portioning pickled cabbage on the dumpling plate because he's seeing all the pickled cabbage go in the compost. And if nobody ever asks Walter what he thinks, we're never gonna find that out. And then if you take that little bit of pickled cabbage and you multiply it by all the plates we serve in a week, a month, a year, that's a lot of cabbage. And it was all the labor that went into pickling it and all the other ingredients. And so the idea is really that we all have this inherent knowledge from working in the business. And if we share that and create better outcomes for everyone based on that, that can really transform what it's like to work at a restaurant.
That's great. Genius. I'll take the extra cabbage. You just put it aside and I'll come get it.
We'll put it in the frittata.
Oh yeah. So tell me about COVID. I mean, I know what COVID is, but
I've heard of it, yeah.
That seemed to sort of crystallize a lot of things for you. Can you
Yes.
sort of talk about tell me, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I could talk about COVID for a long time, but what I will say to summarize is that COVID made me realize that if in 5 or 10 years Mei Mei is gone, that would be sad, and I would be sad. But if in 5 or 10 or 20 years there are not any independent restaurants where you can eat unusual or novel or weird things run by unusual, novel, and weird people, if that's what the landscape looks like, then I'm gonna be really pissed. I can't eat Chipotle when I'm 90. Like, can you imagine? How terrible. And so what I
Grandma Irene, eat your Chipotle.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, like eat your Crunch Wrap and be quiet, Grandma. So, shout out. And so for me, I really became focused on, instead of using Mei Mei to try to raise the ceiling on what a restaurant can be, can I help raise the floor for all of us? Because I just want there to be cool stuff to eat when I'm old.
Yeah.
And also, restaurants are so important to communities, to neighborhoods, to individual families. I'm sure we all have a professional service provider in our lives, our accountant, our lawyer, our dental hygienist, who grew up doing their homework in the dining room of their parents' restaurant. And if that goes away, because you can't do your homework at Sweetgreen, like that is a huge, huge loss for the fabric of our communities.
Yeah.
And so that's really what COVID showed me.
Yeah.
It was that it's not about Mei Mei, it's about what I eat when I'm old. But also, it's about this much bigger picture, and Mei Mei is one piece of that.
Yeah.
And if I can be out there improving conditions for all independent restaurants, that helps Mei Mei too.
Yeah. Tell me about some of the things that you started working on then, because that, I mean, I think for a lot of people saw the precariousness of
Yes.
food in restaurants, and not just restaurants, but the food supply chain.
Yes.
And I think it made people think about food in this, new way,
Yes.
right?
One of the things we did during COVID right away was we launched a campaign called Unsung Restaurants, which was a GoFundMe where basically we said, you see all these restaurant groups asking for donations, but what happens to the restaurants where nobody speaks English, or they're not using the internet the way that these big restaurant groups are, or no one's running their PR, or there's no Instagram account. And so we basically said, if you want to contribute money to some restaurant and you don't know how because there's no GoFundMe for them, we'll just be that GoFundMe. And then we'll write the checks and we'll mail them out. And so we raised, I think, $15,000, which was not a lot, but I think it reminded people who are isolated for all different reasons.
Yeah.
It reminded those operators that there are people out there who love them and who care. And so, El Oriental de Cuba in Jamaica Plain, for example, he is a bastion of that community, and there was no GoFundMe for him, right? And so we were able to send a couple checks his way, for example. We also created Project Restore Us, which was now is a 501c3 that connected restaurants to community organizations to leverage the industrial supply chain to provide people with food. And I am really waiting and maybe getting antsy about when the food industry is going to deal with food justice. Because typically the way restaurants interact with nonprofits in that space is we cook so that people can come to a gala and overeat to solve hunger. And I don't really think that's the best we can do. And so we caused like a small local masa shortage in the Northeast.
Do tell.
We moved hundreds of tons of food. We used restaurants and restaurant workers to do it, and then we utilized volunteers to deliver basic pantry staples to primarily undocumented and immigrant families. And there was a real interesting moment where some of the recipients said to us, I'm a delivery driver, but I've never had anyone deliver anything to me. And we had like furloughed Harvard staff doing deliveries for us. We had people from all walks of life who were really engaging in this moment where we're trying to address food insecurity on like a neighbor-to-neighbor basis. We had a lot of people come by Mei Mei because they were Mei Mei customers, and they were like, well, I've never driven through Chelsea before, but I'm sure I can figure it out. Like, that was really kind of a poignant moment for me. And again, what made me continue to think about, okay, how do we leverage what we have, the access that we have, the infrastructure that we have, and how do we use that to actually feed people? Not just our paying customers, but anyone who's our neighbor, who's our community member.
There are a lot of restaurant owners, but not, you're the one who, not everyone did this. I mean, what do you think, why did you become such a central locus of this movement?
Well, I think one important thing is that I'm in a privileged position. I grew up in Brookline. I was a highly enriched child. And I opened my business without student loan debt. I opened it without crushing bank debt or any of those things. And so if I were, I can't pretend that I know what it's like to open a restaurant business and to pour your whole life savings into it and to have kids to feed. That is the situation that many restaurant owners are still in. And that's not me. And so, thinking back to my grandparents who opened a restaurant when they came to this country, who probably are rolling, in their graves or whatever. But I always thought, like, okay, maybe grandma wouldn't be so mad if I were like trying to do things differently. Or if I were like trying out new stuff and experimenting. Maybe she wouldn't be so terribly pissed at me. But
why would you think your grandparents are rolling over in their graves?
well, there's kind of the classic immigrant story, which is like, we came here so that you could have a better life, and that means you are a doctor or a lawyer or a physicist or a consultant, which is what all of my aunts and uncles
Got it. Back on the doctor thing.
Right. It all comes back. And my mom's like, there's still time for med school, Irene. And I'm like, okay, thanks for that. But I do think that I am like of this privileged generation in the history of my family where I can work in food because I love it and not because I have to. Mm-hmm. And so for me, to continue to be worthy of that privilege means like I have to show up for people. And I think that's part of how I justify to myself this path that I've chosen. But also it's the thing I love the most.
Yeah. Wonderful, thank you. All right, let's open for questions. They're piling up here on this iPad thing. Let's see. I have to scroll through. Talk amongst yourselves. No, just kidding. Okay, question. I don't know the answer to this. All right. Is organic or local more important? Aren't massive amounts of the worst pesticides sprayed onto our soil that could get into water worse than getting food from far away?
Love this question. Yeah, I mean,
hard questions are coming. Yes.
I am not an expert in this by any means, but I think labels, broadly speaking, try to boil down a lot of complexity into one word or the absence of that word. And I think it's pretty well documented that organic can still be incredibly destructive in a lot of different ways. Same with local. I mean, just because a farm is nearby does not mean they're not using terrible chemicals, does not mean they're not abusing their workers. It's complicated. At Mei Mei, we try really hard to emphasize relationships, and I think that comes into building community and also having space for accountability. And so if something does go wrong, like say there's an outbreak of E. coli, or say there's some kind of labor scandal,
right?
At least we know the person and we can have a conversation with them. Like the idea that when you go to the grocery store, all the food you see, all the food you can buy, like you could never go talk to the person who was responsible for that, if you could even find them.
Yeah.
Like every berry is picked by a person who you will never ever know. That's so weird.
Right.
Like it's kind of gross. I don't know. And so I think that for all of these labels, we can hope that local coincides with somebody having, climate-friendly practices or ethical work practices, but it's not a guarantee. Yeah. And so I think for us as consumers, we have to decide in which situations do we privilege a certain label over another. And I think also like a lot of this stuff is unknowable. So we kind of have to be okay with that on some level. But again, there is a lot of research out there about what all of these different words mean, what they don't mean, fail to mean. And I would say when you can, buy the food from someone who you could go talk to if there were a problem. Someone within a day's drive, someone local, someone regional. And that is part of how we're accountable to each other. If we have to answer to each other, we do things differently. That's I think, just the way it is, for better or for worse.
Right. Maybe that's part of why the food system has gone so awry, is there's so much distance between us and where it's growing.
I really believe that.
Yeah. All right, here's a question. You said earlier Boston was kind towards you in allowing failures.
Oh, yeah.
Can you elaborate? What failures?
Ooh,
describe some of these failures.
Where to begin?
And how did the Boston allow you to recover somehow?
Yeah, I mean, on a food truck, there are failures every day. And
drop that. Here you go.
I think that, oh my gosh, once we served someone a piece of Swiss chard gratin that had a whole grasshopper in it. And they
Extra protein.
And they were like, at least I know it was fresh. So there's one example. But what I would say is that
Jesus.
I I hope.
Got distracted by the grasshopper.
I know,
All right, back
I
up.
know.
Okay, back up. Other failures.
I think that being from Boston, and also Boston being in a kind of place in the food scene where we're like always going to be 3 to 5 years behind New York. There's a little chip on our shoulders, and so people want you to succeed. People want to think the best of you. I don't know if that's so true in this very moment that we're in, but I would say in 2012, when food trucks were just starting to happen, when farm to table was really kind of coming to a crescendo in the fine dining restaurants, our clientele was just so, they were so fun. Like, they would roll with whatever. Like, there were women who worked at high-end PR firms who were ordering whole barbecued lamb heads off the truck, which was a Halloween special we did. Because the farmers are like, no one's gonna buy the lamb heads. And we were like, we'll take care of it.
Of course nobody's gonna buy the lamb heads.
Yeah, so, but then, you put a barbecue sauce on it, problem solved, right? And so these beautiful, glamorous women in Back Bay were like, do you have a screwdriver so I can eat the brain? And we were like, yes, we do have a screwdriver. But so, like,
wow.
Imagine how much you have to trust and be excited about a food truck to be like, I'll have the lamb head, and do you have any tools for me?
Yeah.
But I think that is like one extreme example of Boston just being open to what we were up to. And I think we did a good job selling it and showing that like it is fun and it is weird and it's gonna be something you've never had before, and like we invite you to be in it with us. And I think that's part of what has made Mei Mei successful and kind of stand the test of time in so many pivots.
Just thinking about your grandchildren feeding you the lamb head.
What a dream.
Grandma Irene, Okay, how has your work in Mei Mei and in food sustainability changed how you cook at home?
Oh my God, I cook almost never at home. Because I'm so committed to the success of independent restaurants that all I do is eat takeout. It's the best. I will say,
doing your part.
That's right, public service. When I was a home cook, I loved elaborate cooking projects. And I loved like going through the cookbooks and like picking things out and then like writing my shopping list and like organizing my prep. I would like set up a deep fryer on my stove, like a pot to deep fry in. God, you would never catch me doing that ever again. Because I know what a real deep fryer is like. And I know that it's so easy to use. So I do feel like it's pushed my cooking to be a lot simpler. And in some cases, I cook with things that I wouldn't cook with at the restaurant because it's outside of our guidelines or it's not financially, feasible to put a certain item on a menu. And I think those are kind of the main ways that it's shifted my cooking, which is maybe not what you'd expect, but.
That is interesting. All right, there seems to be a lot of stigma around taking leftovers home and eating them, which is true. Why is that? That was a question. Why is that? And how do we change that culture?
Get new friends. I mean, I don't know. Sorry, that's glib, but what I would say is that, I don't know, I think like, I don't know who this person is who's asking the question, but in many cultures around the world, the aunties always be taking home leftovers. And so I think that if you feel that you are being ostracized by your peers, just think of like every Chinese auntie who is proud of you for bringing your Tupperware and taking that stuff home with you. Or maybe it's, think of the people in your family, your ancestors, your grandma, whatever. She doesn't want that food to go to waste. Do right by her. That's my opinion.
There you go.
And then also, like, keep building the culture around it. Like, it feels good to not waste food. And so pat yourself on the back and then bring a Tupperware and offer it to a friend. And then if they take it, be like, oh my God, you're so awesome. This is so great. Isn't this so great? You don't have to make dinner for yourself tonight. Like, there's so many wins in it. And I think if we emphasize that, that's how we do away with the stigma.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's great. All right, meat question. Why did you decide on sourcing pasture-raised meat versus just going with plants, right?
Great question.
Meat, largest contributor to the food's climate problems. A diet shift is needed. I mean, it is true. My research shows going vegan is the best thing to do, but there's, challenges, right? So, and especially cultural, right? Or cultural is one of the challenges.
Right.
So tell me about your decision, your thought process.
Yeah, I mean, I think, to be totally honest, most of the people who I hang out with are never going to give up eating meat completely. And I think that what I would like is for us to leverage people's love for meat into eating meat differently and thinking about meat differently. So I certainly support people who eat a vegan diet or a vegetarian diet for any reason. I think people should choose how they eat. And what I think we've tried to do with Mei Mei is to make it feel really good and really fun to eat meat selectively.
Yeah.
And also not like in huge American portions. In so many cultures, meat is a seasoning, it's a topping, it's an ingredient. It's not the center of the plate.
Yeah.
And I do kind of feel personally that we can move a lot more people in that direction than we can towards veganism.
Yeah.
But I think the research on meat is incredibly compelling and gross and horrible. And so that's also part of why we're so selective. And we try to buy our meat from farms where you could go visit them and you would be like, yeah, I'll still eat pork after seeing that. But like if you go to a CAFO or a factory farm, like I don't think anyone should be eating that. But we do for all sorts of reasons.
Yeah.
So I guess for me, it's a compromise in some ways, but also I do have hope that a different kind of agriculture could change the calculus of eating meat for many people.
There's this adjacent question here about chicken feet.
Oh, great.
Where about Americans wanting to eat only certain cuts of meat. And you sort of brought this up with the lamb head earlier, but how do you ever try to introduce sort of the odd cuts in, such as chicken feet?
Yeah, especially in the food truck days, we were serving people all kinds of crazy stuff from different corners of the animal.
Wait, example? Give me an example.
I mean, we made like a pig head torchon where you just cook the head and then you take all the stuff that's not a bone and then you like make it into a log and then you batter it and you deep fry it and you serve it with waffles. That's that's what we did, not what you did.
Amazing.
But I think, again, it's like, can we make the food feel fun and lively, even if, it's a different cut than what you're used to? For years, and actually still, we don't serve chicken at Mei Mei, much to the chagrin of many people who love to eat chicken, including myself. But chicken that's raised outside is so expensive that we can't really make it work and be the price point we want to be. So it's been super interesting. It usually is an opportunity for us to have a conversation. Sometimes people just walk away from us. But chickens, they're so little, and when you have them outside, they get killed. And there's a lot of challenges to large-scale pasture raising of poultry. There are more and more farms that are doing it, so you might see a chicken item on the menu at Mei Mei soon, but it's tough. So I think we're trying to get people to think about meat in different ways.
Yeah.
And I think we've done an okay job.
Yeah.
But I do love chicken feet. Always asking for the chicken feet.
What do you do? How do you like your chicken feet?
I like them steamed and then fried. So like the steaming makes them tender and it kind of like breaks down all of the tendons and connective tissue, and then you fry it so it's crispy, and that's how I like it.
All right.
Yeah.
Can you speak about Best Buy expiration dates?
Oh yeah, that doesn't mean anything.
Yeah.
And anywhere on the internet will tell you that. It's what the manufacturer wants you to think. And do you think, like, what reason could they have for making you go through the food faster? The crazy thing that I've also learned in the process of researching for our book is that these standards vary not only by manufacturer, but sometimes by state. And so, like, if you drive a pound of butter over state lines, is it expired? No, of course not, of course not. And so what we advocate for is using your common sense, using your 5 senses, and we think in most cases, you know if that food is good or not. obviously, if you're feeding someone who is immunocompromised or who could have, a very negative adverse reaction, we preach caution. But like, expiration dates are new. Like, our grandmas didn't have those, and were they fine? More or less, sure.
Yeah, occasionally not. But
Yeah,
yes, okay.
occasionally not, in a few notable circumstances. But I think that's something where, again, we want people to feel empowered to make their own decisions about that, and to feel that they can use their intuition and not rely on the person who is selling you the product to tell you when to eat it.
Yeah. Okay, there's a bunch of questions here about induction stoves.
Oh, great.
And so I don't know if you have an induction stove at the restaurant. Oh, interesting.
No.
All right, before you talk about that, and also some cities and towns are banning natural gas for hookups, and is that especially an issue for Chinese cooking?
Yes.
Okay, can you talk a little bit about stoves?
Sure. So I'm not an expert on this, but electric stoves, there are two different kinds. One is induction, which uses magnets, and one is just having a really hot plate and putting a pot on that hot plate. Induction cooking is extremely efficient. We are just not used to it. We have both kinds at Mei Mei. If you come for a dumpling class, you can try out our induction cooktops. But I do think that a lot of folks have brought up that other cultural, cooking tools and implements and heat sources really do not work with electricity.
Right, it's a wok issue. Is
Right.
that correct? Okay.
And I think, could it also be like a tandoor issue? Could it be a rotisserie issue? Like, these are all, I think, valid questions.
So, yeah, so my understanding of the wok, because a wok, you take it off and it's still hot, right? But if you have an induction stove, once you remove it, then the pan loses heat very quickly. Is that sort of the issue?
That's part of it.
Okay.
And then also there's a flavor to wok cooked foods, which is called wok hei. And it is from the combustion of the oil when it gets burned by the flame. And that's why those pan-fried beef noodles are so, so good. But I do, I think the food scientists will figure it out.
Yeah.
So I'm not that worried about it.
Okay.
There's even, people have studied, if you're using an electric wok burner and you also use your blowtorch at the same time, you can get that wok hei. So,
nice.
if you're going to go to those lengths, I support it. But I do hope that we can center these kinds of concerns, because I think it behooves all of us to make these changes work for everyone.
Yeah, so heat and cheese solve all problems.
Yes.
It sounds like.
Yeah,
okay.
I think that's what I said.
Thoughts on plant-based meat? So many interesting questions from our audience.
Yeah, well, okay. For me, plant-based meat really, there are a lot of versions of it. Some of it is supposed to act like meat, and some of it is just a different thing that's protein. Plant-based proteins, obviously in Chinese cuisine and in other cuisines, date way, way back. White people did not invent them a decade ago. And so I think for me, I feel much more, I have a much friendlier attitude towards the more traditional versions of plant-based meat. The idea that we should make a plant-based ground beef that bleeds, I don't know. Not for me, probably. But I understand why this is a concern and why this is a question. And there's now plant-based fish, plant-based chicken. We're not restricted to the world of bleeding ground beef, which I think is nice. And going back to this chicken question at Mei Mei, we've wondered, should we have a pasture-raised chicken product and also sell a factory farmed chicken product next to it at appropriate prices? Or could we cut the pasture-raised ground chicken with plant-based chicken and then have a chicken experience that, splits the middle, maybe makes no one happy? I don't know. Yeah. These are all questions. Tell me what you think. We would love to hear from you.
But I think, interesting.
Yeah.
It's good that you're thinking about this. Do you feel like your other fellow I don't know how to say it, restaurateurs?
That sounds right, yeah.
Are thinking the same way?
I think many of us are.
Yeah.
And again, in restaurants where it's so hard to break even, much less be profitable, a lot of this is going to come down to the bottom line. And so can we show consumer demand? Can we create products that are more affordable than the meat options? More affordable than the best meat options? Probably. More affordable than the worst ones? I don't know.
Yeah.
But I do think that's what's gonna move the needle in restaurants.
Yeah. Are there a few restaurants, can you shout out a few restaurants or businesses that are doing it right around here that people should look into?
I mean, I think I always have to shout out Tracy Chang from Pagu Restaurant. My spouse and I got married at Pagu. That's how much we loved it. And she also leads a lecture series here at Harvard on science and cooking. And she's also very active on different kind of aquaculture and fish stuff. Sustainable fish stuff is what it's called. And she also, is an incredibly principled employer. During COVID, she carpooled all of her employees to work because she didn't want anyone to take the tea, even with 2 young kids at home, blah, blah, blah. So that's the plug for Tracy Chang.
Perfect,
Yeah.
great. Okay, I think we have time for one last question, maybe 2. Okay, well, any food justice organizations people should support?
Yes, so many food justice organizations. I can talk briefly
paper.
about the ones that I'm on the board of, and then we can go into some other ones. But I will put a big shout out for the Food Project, which is based here in Roxbury and Dorchester, and also has farms in Lincoln, Wenham, Beverly, and Lynn. They bring youth from diverse backgrounds together to learn about food justice and food systems, and also to farm. I spent the weekend on their farm outside of Nubian Square, weeding a bed of carrots with like the coolest, 15-year-olds I've ever met. And the work they do, I think, is really essential. They've been doing it since the 90s, early 90s, I think. And so when you look actually at like the community and ecosystem of people who are doing food justice and urban farming work, a lot of them trace kind of their learning back to the Food Project. They're also, they have a new pair of co-executive directors, one of whom was a youth in that program.
Oh my God.
And so this moment where the people who were served by the organization come to lead the organization, I just think that's really special. I also work with the Haley House, which does housing, soup kitchen operations, and is going to reopen its bakery cafe in Nubian Square.
Yay.
And with Project Bread, which is a food advocacy and access organization that was instrumental in getting school meals for all passed recently in Massachusetts, which is an incredible, incredible win. Yes, and I'm just so proud to get to work with these organizations. But what I would say is look for the urban farm in your neighborhood. Look for the community fridge in your neighborhood. It's great to support these kind of bigger names that are out there, but the folks who probably need your support the most are the ones that nobody is talking about on a stage like this.
Yeah.
And the power of connecting with our neighbors in a time like this, I think, just cannot be underestimated. And so if you can find the folks who are doing the work where you live, that is really what I would advocate.
Last question, and this is from the audience, from a couple people. What gives you hope looking forward? Probably all the things you're just saying.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I think I hope for like that's my job is what
Hope?
I think. Yeah.
Hope is our profession.
Yeah. And one of the things that gives me hope is seeing how food makes people come alive. And you all stood in line for dumplings, so you saw it too. At Mei Mei, we say dumplings make the world go round because every culture has its dumpling, and also people will wait in line for them. So I think that is what gives me the most hope, is seeing that like, no matter how cynical you are, like if you eat something that's really delicious, like that is like a pure moment. And that happens to me all the time. I'm probably the most cynical person I know. And also, I am so fortunate that I get to eat delicious food. I get to discover things that are new to me all the time. And those moments are just, I don't know, they're just really powerful.
Yeah.
And so that is what gives me hope, and that's what motivates me to keep doing this work. And then also, again, like thinking about 90-year-old Irene, like what's she gonna eat? I just don't know. So I have to be hopeful when I think about her.
Wonderful. Thank you, everybody. A round of applause for Irene. Thank you so much. She's eating chicken feet and lamb
you're so
heads.
nice. Thank you. Yeah. Cheers. Thank you.
Oh, look, you're going to go standing over here.